Welcome to the deep dive. So, if you're like most of us, when you hear the word yoga, your mind, it immediately goes to Hinduism, to classical Indian philosophy.
And it's absolutely right. I mean, that's its home, its profound tradition.
But the history of spirituality, especially in a place as complex as the Indian subcontinent, is never that simple, is it?
Never. And our sources today, they tell this incredible story of um, centuries of interaction, of dialogue, and even mutual inspiration between yoga and the mystical side of Islam, which is Sufism.
Right. So we've pulled together a stack of research that really gets into this question of whether we can talk about an Islamic yoga.
And our mission really is to trace that journey. It starts way back in the 8th century, and we want to see how these two, seemingly distinct paths, shared techniques, theories, and even mystical goals.
Okay, so let's set the stage. 8th century, Islam arrives in the Indian subcontinent.
And what's so fascinating is that it's not just a military story. There was this immediate intellectual curiosity from Muslim scholars about the knowledge systems they were encountering.
Yes. You think of the House of Wisdom, the Beit al-Hikmah, in Baghdad during the Islamic Golden Age. We always hear about them translating Plato and Aristotle.
Right, the Greek philosophy.
But they were just as interested in knowledge from India. That's how we got our Arabic numerals. They came from India.
Exactly. And that same intellectual appetite, it extended directly to yogic traditions. The key early example is the polymath Abu Rayhan al-Biruni.
From Central Asia, right? He traveled all over India.
All over. In the 11th century, he was writing about everything, science, culture, religion. But he did something remarkable.
He didn't just observe yoga then.
No, he engaged with it deeply. He actually translated Patanjali's Yoga Sutras into Arabic. He called it Bhutanjal.
Wow.
Now, this was mainly an academic project, cataloging Indian knowledge. But it proves that the core texts of yoga were known, and they were taken seriously in the wider Islamic world centuries and centuries ago.
Okay, that establishes the intellectual interest. But that's a huge leap from a scholar in Baghdad translating a text to actual practitioners integrating these ideas.
It is a huge leap.
So how did that happen?
The bridge, as all our sources point out, was practical spirituality. It was Sufism, or tasawwuf. Sufism really became the main way Islam spread in India. It offered a more charismatic, more relatable approach than, invading armies.
So the Sufi teachers, the sheikhs, they were engaging directly with the local spiritual landscape.
Precisely. And they had to, because the core goal of Sufism made that overlap almost inevitable. The whole point is purifying the soul, fighting the ego, the nafs, to reach a state of annihilation in God, fana.
A direct personal experience of the divine.
Yes. And to get there, Sufis developed these very structured disciplines, both mental and physical.
You're talking about things like Dhikr.
Exactly. The rhythmic vocal repetition of God's names. And sama, which is listening to spiritual music, sometimes leading to ecstatic dance. These are spiritual technologies.
And that's what's so striking when you describe that. The breathing, the chanting, using rhythm to reach a trance state, the goal of unity. It sounds so much like Raja Yoga or Bhakti Yoga.
It's an incredible spiritual resonance. They both arrived at this same conclusion, that the body is an instrument you have to tune to achieve that union. And this practical overlap is what sparked centuries of dialogue between Sufis and yogis.
So who's the key figure in that early dialogue? I'm thinking of Mu'in ad-Din Chishti.
Chishti is absolutely foundational, 13th century. He settles in Ajmer and establishes the Chishti order, which becomes one of the most important in the subcontinent.
And he was known for being incredibly open, right? Engaging with Brahmins and yogis.
Deeply. He was known to study Sanskrit, to bring local music into the Sama. His whole philosophy was about universal love, not dogma. And the proof is his tomb.
Which is still a huge pilgrimage site.
For everyone, Muslims, Hindus, people of all backgrounds, it's a living monument to that spiritual synthesis.
Okay, so once they're sharing practices like breath work, did they start sharing their maps of the body, of consciousness? This brings us to the subtle body.
It does. And this is where it gets really interesting structurally. In Central Asia and India, Sufi orders started developing this idea of the lataf.
The subtle centers?
Exactly. They aren't physical organs, but spiritual or energetic centers that you activate through meditation. They're key to purifying consciousness on the path to fana.
And different orders had different systems.
Right. The Kubrawaya, the Chishti, the Naqshbandi, they mapped out, 5, 6, even 8 centers.
Let's focus on the Naqshbandi system. Our sources say it's one of the most detailed.
Very detailed, especially as laid out by Ahmad Sirhindi. He described 5 main centers in the chest area, And each one is linked to a spiritual faculty, a color, and even a specific Quranic prophet.
Give us an example.
Okay, so the first center, the qalb, or heart, is yellow. It's associated with the prophet Adam, and it's located just below the left breast.
Wow.
Then you have the Sur, the secret. That one's white, associated with Moses. And the highest one, Akfa, is green, and it's linked to the prophet Muhammad right at the sternum.
Okay, so if you're listening and you're familiar with yoga, you've immediately jumped to the chakras.
Of course.
This idea of energy centers along an axis, activated for spiritual awakening. The parallel is it's unavoidable.
And this is the big question scholars have debated for years. Is the Lataf system a direct borrowing from the Indic chakras, or did similar ideas just develop independently?
What's the consensus?
It's complicated. Sufism definitely emerged from its own Islamic framework. But the fact that these incredibly detailed systems flourished specifically in India and Central Asia, a region already saturated with yogic thought, well, it makes a very strong case for influence, or at least a shared understanding.
And that shared understanding becomes explicit textually in the Mughal period. This is where the integration becomes undeniable.
Yes, the Mughal era was this syncretic, stable cultural moment where people could actually write these things down. Take a text like the Treatise on the Human Body.
Yeah.
It was attributed to Chishti to give it authority, but it was really written by his followers much later.
And what's inside? Is it just vague analogies?
Not at all. The first chapter is basically a Hatha Yoga physiology manual. It lays out the three main yogic channels: the central Sushumna, and the two side channels, Ida and Pingala, the moon and the sun.
So it's literally giving Sufis a yogic map of the subtle body.
And instructions on how to use it. The meditation it describes is a classic yogic technique. Focus your gaze on the tip of your nose. This connects the sun and moon, eyes Ida and Pingala, to the central channel of life, the Sushumna.
And what's the goal of that practice?
To visualize your spiritual guide, and then achieve the effacement of the self until, and this is a quote, nothing is seen but the one God himself. It's using a yogic method to achieve the Sufi goal of fana.
This feels like a perfect entry point for Muhammad Goth Qualiori, maybe the most important figure in this synthesis.
Absolutely. A Shatari order master, a musician, a writer. He wrote a book called the Bahr al-Hayat, the Ocean of Life.
And this was a translation of a Sanskrit yogic text, the Amadakuna.
It was more of a reinterpretation. And this book became hugely influential. It circulated all over the Islamic world, from North Africa to Istanbul.
So it wasn't a literal translation. What did he change to make it fit an Islamic worldview?
He was a spiritual pragmatist. The original text had things that would conflict with strict monotheism, references to different deities. So Goth, he strategically reframed those sections.
How? Can you give an example?
A key technique was to connect Hindu figures to Islamic prophets. So he identified the gods Brahma and Vishnu with the Quranic prophets Abraham and Moses.
So he's arguing it's all part of the same primordial wisdom.
Exactly. He's saying this isn't a foreign text, it's a sister tradition. And he expanded the practical side. The original only had maybe 5 yoga postures. Goss expands that to over 20. He was clearly promoting the physical practice.
What did he think was the ultimate connection between them?
His own words on this are just remarkable. He said that Sufis and yogis share the same fundamental experience of kash, or mystical unveiling. The language is different, he argued, but the mystical state itself is the same.
That is an incredibly powerful statement for that time. And it leads us right to Darashikoh, the Mughal prince who tried to take this synthesis all the way.
Darashikoh, a fascinating figure, a Qadri Sufi, great-grandson of Akbar. He was on a mission to prove that Islam and the Indian traditions were, at their core, compatible.
His most famous book is Majma al-Bahrain, the meeting place of the two oceans.
And his conclusion was that the monotheists of India, the followers of the Upanishads, had reached the exact same spiritual truths as the Sufis. He said apart from language, there was no difference.
But let's look at the practice manual he wrote, the Risala-i Akwuma. What techniques does he describe in there?
He details 2, and the first is this incredible fusion of yogic breath control, pranayama, with the absolute center of Islam. The declaration of faith, the shahada.
The instructions must have been very esoteric. It's rare to see that stuff written down.
It is. He says to sit like you would for Muslim prayer, but with your elbows on your knees. Then you use your fingers to seal all the openings on your face, thumbs in the ears, index fingers on the eyes, and so on.
That's a mudra, a classic hatha yoga technique for internalizing the senses.
Precisely. And he combines it with the shahada. You inhale slowly through your left nostril while thinking, no God. You hold the breath. Then you exhale slowly through the right nostril while thinking, God.
Wow.
He even warns that exhaling too quickly could be spiritually damaging. It's yogic technology put entirely in the service of Islamic monotheism.
It's total integration. What was the second technique?
This one he called the prime recitation, or Sultan al-Adhkar. The practice is to sit in a quiet, isolated place and focus all your attention on your ears, just listening until a subtle, internal, primordial sound appears.
How did he describe that sound? This is where the details really matter.
He called it a fixed tone that pervades the entire universe, and his descriptions are so vivid, he compared it to a big cauldron boiling, or the buzzing sound heard in the nest of bees. Focusing on this sound, he said, leads directly to ecstasy.
And he links this to the Prophet Muhammad himself.
He does. He explicitly connects this inner sound to the bell-like sound the Prophet reportedly heard when he received revelation. That completely validates the technique within an Islamic framework.
So you have the Sufi practice, the Sultan al-Adhkar, focusing on an inner sound, which is a perfect parallel to the Indian tradition of Nada yoga, the yoga of sound.
A perfect parallel. Nada yoga is all about the idea that the universe is vibration. The syllable Om is the Nada Brahman, the sound of reality itself. To hear the inner Nada is to hear the universe.
And if you look at the Nada yoga texts, like the Shiva Samhita, the instructions are almost identical. Close your ears and listen for a series of mystic sounds.
And the vocabulary they use, it's the same. They both describe hearing the hum of the bee, the sound of a waterfall, and the sound of bells or tinkling bell.
That shared vocabulary, the bee, the bell, that's what makes the case for this deep cross-pollination so powerful. These weren't just vague goals. These were specific, shared spiritual technologies.
It just highlights how porous those religious boundaries were in South Asia. This dialogue was a huge part of what created unique traditions, like Kabir's poetry or even Sikhism.
So to wrap this up, let's go back to Carl Ernst's analysis. He makes a really important point about not falling for old colonial theories.
Right. The old idea was that Sufism was just borrowed from India. That's wrong. Sufism grew out of an Islamic framework. What we're seeing here is dialogue and integration. Sufis took yogic tools and used them to achieve a Sufi goal.
And this conversation, it hasn't ended. I mean, yoga is everywhere now, including in Muslim-majority countries. And if you look online, you'll see Islamic scholars with completely different opinions.
Completely. Some say it's fine as long as it's just physical exercise. Others forbid it entirely, worried it compromises monotheism. The same debate about boundaries is happening right now.
So as you, the listener, reflect on all this, here's a final thought. We've seen these incredibly detailed, shared spiritual technologies written down centuries ago. If two totally distinct religious paths arrived at such specific practices down to the sound of a mystical bee, does the historical question of influence versus coincidence matter as much as the realization that maybe multiple traditions were exploring the same fundamental truths about the human body, consciousness, and the divine? We'll leave you with that.